Do at night, but I should have time.
Okay, cool. All right, we're live. Well, we're hot.
We're recording episode 118.
We're hot.
Yeah, I think this has been, October was crazy. There's always a lot going in October, especially for me. But, with the election cycle and everything, like especially that ending today, I think this is good that we're just, so you guys know, only hitting one chapter on the book club tonight.
Yeah. Welcome to episode 118, and we are going to be doing our TRL Book Club of the Complete Reticulated Python. Again, guys, for those of you that have not purchased this book, if you are a Retic keeper, aspiring breeder, or even just someone who loves retics but knows that maybe it's a little out of the realm of wanting to keep one, this book is worth its weight in gold. Very affordable book, and the chapter that we are going to go over today is a great example of why this is such a great book. So we're going over the importation process, which is chapter 7. And for those of you that have been following the book club along, yes, we did skip chapter 6, which is the captive history of reticulated pythons. And Nathan, it was kind of a no-brainer on why we skipped it.
Yeah, we have 4 hours of Glenn talking about every little bit of that chapter with us already. If you're new to the Retic Lounge, that's an episode that we compiled together. It was actually 3 parts. So I would suggest going and chipping away at that 4-hour episode and really diving deep into the history. Beyond that, I think the only thing you're missing out on is, some of the cool pictures that are included in the book, but we don't include those anyway because we want you to buy the book.
Yeah. Please buy the book. Support Glenn, support Russ, and also support us by liking this video. Drop in a comment. If you guys are following along, let us know how it's going. And for those of you that are listening to us and you want to join our Patreon, there's that link down below, patreon.com/the Retic Lounge. Before we go any further into this, Nathan, I also want to give that shout out to Cold Blooded Cafe. Guys, we've now been sponsored by them for a little over a month. They have yet to let me down when it comes to providing the best quality of rodents that you can buy out there. Guys, please visit coldbloodedcafe.com. Use our code. You'll get 20% off the first time that you use that. Reptile Lounge 20 for 20% off. And yes, if you are still buying $200 or more, they also have a free shipping code on their website as well.
Which, if you're ordering rodents, like, let's be real, you should be ordering a couple $100 worth of food if you have even a small collection like me.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the only place outside of not getting that is if you only have like 1 or 2 snakes. I could see maybe buying
a bag or 2. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But yeah, I mean, with the retics, especially, I the days of $200 orders for me are long gone.
Lucas, totally off. Well, it's not totally off topic, but how long did it take you to get a freezer for your rodents and transfer your rodents from the family fridge to a dedicated freezer?
The moment I got my second retic, only because of my spouse, only because of Elise. She was like, I don't want rats in the freezer.
Okay.
I went on Craigslist. I found a used freezer chest. I got it for $50. The downside of that freezer chest, and it was a pain in the ass, is I brought home some German roaches. So then I had to then I had a German roach problem in my house for about a week, and I had to exterminate them. Was not fun.
Have been reversed.
Yes. It wasn't fun.
I would highly suggest running down to the Home Depot and not doing the classifieds thing, because I think I picked mine up for $150. Yours is probably a little bigger than mine, but
I think mine's 5 cubic foot.
We're not comparing sizes.
Before we jump into the chapter, I want to let you know I got my Eastern melanistic hognose pair that me and James got together. I got them today. Dude, they're as long as my pointer. I've never owned or seen a snake that tiny in my life.
Huh.
The breeder shipped them in their enclosures, like in their tubs, because they're so tiny. It was like, hey, like keep them in here for like half a dozen feeds, then move them into what you want. And I was like, okay, cool. He has like shredded paper, newspaper in there. And so I'm out there like I'm like, where's the snake? It was under all of it. And I literally saw it and it was like this big. And I was like, are you kidding me? It was so tiny.
Those are the ones that are more likely to play dead on you, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of them was already huffing and puffing with like the cobra neck when I lifted the paper, and I was like, okay, back down. I want to get
probably not to test. Good not to test those waters so early.
Exactly. Yeah. I saw it puff up and I was like, nope, back in. But yeah, should be fun. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. My project this week is, I feel like I've talked about it, but getting that incubator behind me running. Found out this week that it turns on. It sounded like the fan and everything turned on, which obviously I don't want.
Wait, you don't want the fan to turn? Oh, you're talking about the actual, like the coolant and the...
I don't know if the coolant works. It might be fun to just run it for a day or two and just monitor temperatures. See if it's just got circulation. Because if it's got circulation, then...
That's perfect.
Yeah. Not a bad setup.
No.
But yeah, I need to run some heat tape in there.
I'd probably install some of your own circulation as a backup in case that one goes out.
Yeah, that's fair. It's an older unit, so...
Yeah.
Not a bad idea.
Whether you've poured your heart and soul into your reptile business or you've just begun your business journey, AE Foundry has you covered with next-level expertise in graphic design, motion graphics, videography, photography, and so much more. If you've been dying for a new logo for your reptile business, motion graphics for your current logo, a new website, or need assistance making your video podcast come to life, then listen carefully. AE Foundry's mission places storytelling at its core. AE Foundry believes that a distinctive story and background are the driving forces that set your brand apart. In today's market, consumers seek more than just products. They crave a connection built on trust with the brands they cherish. AE Foundry is committed to empowering small businesses and fostering authenticity that resonates with their consumers. Reach out to them and let them help you craft a visual narrative that helps establish a genuine and lasting connection with your audience. To contact AE Foundry, email them at aromero@aefoundry.com or on Instagram at AE Foundry. When it comes to housing your retics, trust me, you're going to want an enclosure that will be just as strong and durable as your reticulated python. The Heartland reptile enclosure is next level tough and will outlive you and your retic by several generations. Heartland reptile enclosures are designed and manufactured out of powder-coated aluminum to provide the highest quality and longevity available in the reptile enclosure. What makes them even better is they are lighter than your PVC and plastic enclosures out there and are extremely tough. Stop playing around with plastic enclosures for your large constrictors and step up your enclosure game with the Heartland reptile enclosure. To inquire about one of these enclosures, speak to Jordan himself at Heartland Reptiles on Instagram, Facebook, and on TikTok. Here on TRL, we preach about the importance of using hooks, feeding tongs, and other tools with your reticulated python all the time. Animal Equipment by Stoney not only has all the tools you need for any snake you keep, but they have the absolute best hooks on the market. What sets Animal Equipment by Stoney's hooks apart from the other guys is their polycarbonate hook ends that provide a warm feel that won't disturb or bother your retic, ensuring a positive interaction from the get-go. Since 2008, AE Stoney has been supplying zoos, herpetologists, and other animal professionals with their tools. It's time for you to step your hook game up and buy an AE Stoney hook. To learn more and purchase one of their amazing products, visit aestoney.com. All right, we jumping in chapter 7, importation process.
Yeah, I'll start us off with the quote.
Love it.
Have a little extra too. And yet, even after prison, personal ruin, and the depredations of age, Molt and Crutchfield never stopped scheming, never stopped longing for the snake or lizard that would earn each his rightful place in a world that had forgotten them, or rather, had never recognized them to begin with. That comes from Jenny Aaron Smith, and it actually comes from this book, Stolen World, a tale of reptiles, smugglers, and skullduggery. If you want to learn the ins and outs of how animals made their way out to the United States, whether legally, illegally, this is the book to read.
It's amazing.
Like, we have a good chapter here. We have a good story ahead of you, but that book is just so much fun. It feels like you're reading a crime novel. You so essentially are reading a crime novel.
It is. You might be an accessory to a crime if you read this book.
Yeah. I highly recommend that book. That was one of the first like big reptile books I read.
Yeah, and it's a really easy read too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you'll fly through it in a day or two.
Yeah. So let's start off by kicking off what this chapter is going to outline. I'm going to go ahead and read just that first paragraph in there and get into Glen's head on how we wanted to do this chapter, which, by the way, Glen, you did a phenomenal job with this chapter. I want to just kind of share some things before I read the paragraph, but this story of an importation process is the best documented importation story of any locality or any retic, I think, in captivity, or that has come from an animal that got into the trade, and the information, the pictures that are in this chapter, the CITES paperwork, like it goes through every step of the way and even into the captivity process of the line of this Kalaotoa that we're going to get into. So
have you seen any of the CITES paperwork before this?
Dan has showed pictures before. He probably has even a couple on maybe YouTube videos, but I know on his Patreon he's shared some of that info before. It's changed a lot since that paper from 2013 though.
Oh, I'm sure.
All right. So while the importation of reticulated pythons is critical to their history, not much is known publicly about the process, which is exactly why we tend to get so confused on trying to trace back freaking information, right?
This is why we'll fight tooth and nail over, is this the right locality?
Right. The act of importing animals from one country to another is often packed to the brim with lies, deceit, crime, and danger, making the work of those who play by the rules even more difficult. Because of that, those familiar with the process are often tight-lipped on the matter. Nevertheless, it is not impossible to understand how these snakes traveled across an ocean and became major disruptors in herpeticulture. To explore the importation process, the following chapter will examine how a specific snake from Pulau Kalaotoa went from the island to the United States. So just kind of like really kicks off the chapter. Well, I even got a little chills kind of reading that last part.
Yeah. The animal in question, or the animals, I should say, were a group of Kalaotoas, like you mentioned, but it was the Reach Dreams animals that many of us are familiar with if you've been hanging around the industry for, a handful of years.
Yeah. The Reach Dream line currently right now is being worked with Garrett. I know Garrett, I believe, acquired those animals from Forrest.
Yep.
And they were imported by DM Exotics, Dan Mulleary, and we're going to get all into that here. But, what's known today as the Reach Dreams male, Glen writes here, his life started much differently on an island a world away. The story of his importation begins in the spring of 2013. So when this animal was collected, it was already an adult size. Obviously, the age is unknown because we can't ask a snake in the wild, hey, how old are you? And we also don't know growth rates in the wild versus captivity, right?
Yeah, and later on we'll find out why that's so special. I mean, importing a baby is one thing, importing an adult is a complete other world of hurt that you're potentially in for.
Right. So in February or March of 2013, this male began his journey into the pet trade. So what's really amazing about the story of this animal is I don't know if there are any other accounts that can actually name the people who are responsible for tracking and capturing a retic, but the people that did that for this specific animal were named Dahlin and Denpa. And those two people were responsible for tracking down this group of animals, including this reach stream males, that made its way over to the U.S. So,
and their economy relies mostly on farming. These two are coconut farmers.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
I found it interesting in the chapter, that there's two main ways that animals will be brought in or captured and sent to export. So the first way is a reptile exporter, right? So let's talk about someone like, an exporter would contact the trappers on the island where the snakes are being acquired, and they would let the trappers know how many they wanted, and they would
how many heads,
right?
Yeah.
And they would know how many, they would tell them how many they wanted, and then they would go and collect them, right? So that's if there's a high enough demand, and that happens a lot. I know just talking with Dan and being a part of his Patreon, like a bunch of people are asking for animals. So he's out there and he's going out and telling people, hey, we want to try to find these, right? But there's a second way, and that is that trappers would collect snakes from the area and speak to the representative of the export to see if they wanted to acquire what they collected. So sometimes trappers are being proactive, other times trappers are being reactive to what the exporter wants. And what I found really cool about this chapter is it even talks about in Kalaotoa where they are, like what time of the year and where they're collecting them, depending on the dry or wet season.
Yeah. So in the dry season, they're mostly in the marshes, the swamplands, and then in the wet season, they're going into the caves and picking them out of the caves.
Actually, opposite.
I had a feeling I might be switching that up.
Yeah. So Glenn says once they set out to capture the snakes, the trappers would typically find them in the cave systems on the island during the dry season and near the mangrove swamp trees or deforested areas in the wet season. Now, when you were saying that, it sounded right to me because I'm thinking in my head.
Yeah, it
dry
feels
season,
right.
Right. Dry season, I want to be by water. Wet season, I'll go in a cave. But that just sounds like me trying to escape from the rain.
Yeah, that's our human influence coming into it. There's something I want to go over right after that. So once the snakes were collected, they would be held in cloth snake bags. The bag would have the word Kalaotoa written on them, serving as the only signifier of the snake's origin. Other times, locality information is only denoted with a symbol to hide the identity of the origin of the animal. So further just complicating, how transparent and where these animals are coming from. Thus, why we argue over, are these actually Kalaotoas, Salayers, Madus,
Right. I had that part underlined too, and I found it interesting that private communication between exporters and importers would allow for deciphering the locality between exporters and or keeping the information away from prying eyes. So a lot of exporters and importers were like, "Hey, we don't want to we don't want to identify the island because they're trying to keep those, they're trying to keep like that tight circle of making sure that like they could get the animals, as much for themselves as possible, right?"
Yeah. I mean, if you have something that someone else doesn't have, you can charge more for it potentially.
Exactly.
And with these guys being in a like low economic situation, they're going to try to get as much money from the exporter as possible.
And I would like to think maybe some of the intention is like, well, if everyone knows that these snakes are from these tiny islands are going to wipe out the population, but I don't know how much of that is like from a good nature of caring about the animals in the wild.
Well, I mean, this gets into that a little bit and how some
The
of this trade
farms.
actually protects some of the
Yeah.
wild populations, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. After being picked up from Palau Kalatoa, the snakes would island hop through the Solaire Island chain to mainland Sulawesi via boats. Even though they are living beings, they are treated no differently than any other cargo on the boats.
right.
They would typically be unaccompanied unless the deal was done by hand, which I'm guessing with how many trade ships they have to cross, like that's very far and few between with any of these imports.
Yep.
Let's see. The first stop from Pulau Kalatoa would have been Tana Jampea, a larger island in the range of MR Jampayanus. There, the ship would stop to refuel, exchange any necessary cargo, and from Tana Jampea, they would likely have stopped on Solaire Island, and the same process repeated. After departing from Solaire, the Reach Dreams mail would arrive in mainland Sulawesi and be taken to Makassar.
We also want to thank VivTech Products for being an affiliate sponsor of the Retic Lounge. Stop by VivTech Products for the best UV spectrum lighting on the market that will enhance and improve your snake's overall well-being and health. Visit vivtechproducts.com and use the code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off. Again, visit vivtechproducts.com and use our affiliate code ReticLounge23 today for 15% off.
Looking for the perfect accessories for your hatchlings or juvenile retics? Look no further than Heli Guy Serpents. Our sponsor, Chris Sexton, is coming in hot with an amazing 3D printer, creating top-notch perches and other caging accessories for your beloved pets. Enrich your retics environment with their high-quality products. Use our promo code TRL10 for a 10% discount on your purchase. Visit them today at heliguyserpents.com and start giving your pets the best. Heli Guy Serpents, the premier source for 3D printed caging accessories. Again, that's www.heliguyserpents.com and use our promo code TRL10 for 10% off all of your 3D printed accessories today.
Yeah. I feel like I'm mispronouncing that.
No, I think it's Makassar.
Okay, cool. Every time I was reading that in the chapter, I was like, "Oh, I'm totally going to butcher this on the recording."
Right.
But that's the capital of South Sulawesi.
Yeah, and I do want to highlight the significance of Makassar in the trade industry. But even before we do that, I also want to just kind of take it a step further. And again, we'll get into this later as we go through the paragraphs. But from Makassar in Sulawesi, they would be flown to Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia, and then taken to a farm named PT Mega Centrindo. And we'll get into a little bit about that farm, but
is that the farm that you see in a lot of Dan's videos?
That's a good question. I'm not fully sure. And to be honest, he's not working with I don't think he's working with the same farm that he did back in 2013. He goes to different farms.
That's fair. I think that Dan is an incredible resource in learning a lot about the importation process, and beyond just his Patreon. Like if you just watch some of his videos of him like getting import shipments in or going out to pick out animals by hand of what he wants to have imported back, I think Dan's just, one of the best to go check out. So we should link his YouTube page just so people can find it a little easier, even though they're probably already watching.
Yeah, we the Condra Lounge had him on to talk about his recent importation of green tree pythons that he did for the first time in a while, and he went a lot. Like he went really deep into the process. So even that episode is worth throwing out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's talk real quick about the significance of Makassar. So Makassar is a large hub for wildlife trade due to its size, logistic capabilities, and location within Wallachia. One study found that certain local markets in Makassar openly displayed high priority conservation status species on sale, with 43% of these traded species protected under both national and international regulations. Even though this is an open practice, officers of the Natural Resource Conservation Agency are rarely encountered in the animal markets, even by traders. So Makassar is a place where even protected animals are still openly displayed to being picked up and grabbed to take back to farms or to send out for, the rest of the journey that we'll get into.
Yeah, it's a wild thought to think that there's such like an open air black market of these animals, but
that's why you guys need to read The Stolen World.
Oh yeah, some of the turtle heists in there, or tortoise heists. Whew, sounds like something out of like Ocean's 11.
Yeah, it's a good read, but this is also a good read. So, real quick, when it comes to this read stream mail, from Makassar, this animal specifically that we're talking about was accompanied by other snakes, would have been flown to Jakarta. And likewise, its size and logistic capabilities make it another large hub for importing and exporting reptiles and other animals. So let's talk real quick about reptile farms. I have this part underlined and I want to read it. But we talked about this read stream mail on the bottom of page 121 being taken to a farm called PT Megacitrindo. So if you follow with me along here, reptile farms are the backbone of the Asian reptile trade and likely are playing a net positive role in the sustainability of wild populations as it shifts the burden from the wild breeding populations to captive breeding ones to provide for varying human interests. If you go down a couple sentences I underlined here, in addition, reptile farms are subjected to monitoring and inspections with trained enforcement inspectors examining for breeding records, the presence of wounds, external parasites, and other injuries in the breeding population, the presence of sick or dead animals, the absence of multiple life stages represented in the population, and general unusual or suspicious activities. I had no clue.
These farms are subjected to far more oversight than any of us breeders here in the U.S.
I need a permit to keep my retics here in Texas. They haven't come and seen my place. They don't
we wouldn't have had a slither situation if we had this kind of oversight.
Right. And I mean, I even have to have a permit to sell them, and they make me make a list, right? So I have a list of all the names and buyers and the addresses and everything. I have them here in a folder at my house, but they don't ask me to submit them. They don't, I don't know. I don't get it, but it's pretty impressive. Like, that was the last place that I expected for CITES to actually, like do that when it came to farms. And that information the reference was CITES. So that's in their outlined rules and regulations.
That's awesome. So because they're in Jakarta, they're housed in concrete outdoor open air enclosures that serve as holding places for the animals before they're sold to the Asian pet market.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's that dream of like living in Florida and just being able to throw your animal outside and just, it's good to go. It's breeding.
Exactly. I was thinking about this, and I actually think here in San Antonio, if I had enough shade and like trees and stuff, I could probably keep a retic out here for the most part, as long as I provided external heat during the winter.
I don't know if shade would bring you down low enough in some of those hot summer months.
Maybe I'll spray down the grass and give it a little muddy little hide thing.
I feel like if you were to do it, it would almost have to be in like one of those covered patios.
Yeah.
And you would still have to have circulation, maybe even some kind of AC unit pushing air through.
That's true. Yeah, I mean, because it still gets, 110 in the heat. Yeah, it'd still probably be 95.
Yeah.
Anyways, one could dream. But yeah, so at PT Mega Citrando, which is the farm that this Restream males was taken, it was housed in a concrete, outdoor holder, and when the animals were then they were sufficient in demand by an importer, they would be removed from the enclosure and placed back. Sorry.
Bless you.
Jeez. I tried stopping that somehow, and I was like thinking in my head as I was about to sneeze, how am I going to cut this out? But never mind.
Hey, I was sick last week. You get your turn this week.
There you go. But yeah, so what they do is once there's a demand from the importers, they go ahead and put them back in the original bag and box that they came in with the correct labels. And in this case, there were 10 reticulated pythons from Pulau Kalaotoa, and they were loaded into a wooden crate and taken to the Soekarno-Hatta International Airport, which is the airport in Jakarta. Now, I love the picture, like
the shipping crate.
The shipping crates, like it's literally right there. It's so cool.
Yeah, that's one of the things you'll see in some of Dan's videos, but it's really interesting how they have Don't give too much away. They need to buy the book.
True. Buy the
book. But yeah, you can also go onto Dan's page and see these much closer, much more detailed. But I think it's interesting how they have the dowels in there and they're all suspended on the snake bags. They're not just like laying on top of each other, so they're not getting shuffled around and like beat up during transit. Although, with the journey they take, who knows how rough their handling actually is. I would like to think those wooden crates are heavy enough that they don't get beat up all that bad.
I would like to also just while they're on the ships getting all the way to the process of Jakarta, they're treated like any of the other cargo. So I'm thinking of myself on a boat for 20 plus hours, having to unload things. I'm throwing those things.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if they're in the crates on the ships, though.
Who even knows?
Yeah, that's something I would definitely need clarification.
Not this type of bulletproof.
No.
Yeah,
that's for international shipping, 100%.
Right. So yeah, when exiting Indonesia, there's a CITES Appendix 2 export paperwork that's needed from the Ministry of Forestry of the Republic of Indonesia. So due to the logistics of shipping live animals from one country to another, the wooden shipping crate would have contained other species such as white-lipped pythons or amethystine pythons that were also in the shipment from March 31st, 2015, which is where this Restream male was finally sent for importation,
and it states here that this was likely the last legal importation of reticulated pythons into the United States before our injurious animal or the Lacey Act ban on April 9th, 2015. So from there, the wooden shipping crate would be loaded onto a plane, shipped out to Los Angeles International Airport, where a designated U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service port to importer Dan Mulleary of DM Exotics. But once they arrive there, it's not just, hey, here's your box of snakes.
Right.
U.S. Fish and Wildlife, they're sending their agents in and they're inspecting the shipment to make sure that everything is what they said it is. Every species is correctly labeled. There's the correct number of heads, again, in that shipment, and that everything's in place before any kind of hands outside of U.S. Fish and Wildlife touch them.
Yeah, the paragraph goes into detail about how uptight U.S. Fish and Wildlife is.
I want to see video of them just going through one of these shipments.
Yeah, to see if it's if it's like,
see how comfortable they are with snakes. Yeah, like right. how much they're actually getting hands on, because like in my head, I just see a lot of like scared officers going,
I mean,
looks about okay. All right.
I mean, same with me. I mean, to be honest, if I was like going through, and even myself with the experience with the Retics, if I was going through, open one in a bag said King Cobra, I'm going to be like, I believe you. Like, like I'm not opening that.
Yeah. I mean, I could only imagine a venomous shipment. That's
Right.
gotta be a whole other story. But even just white lip pythons and reticulated pythons, like, no, if I didn't know if I didn't know much about snakes, if I didn't keep them at home, probably be pretty hesitant to go through those bags.
Right. So let's talk about like the importation of live animals into the U.S. It's like we've mentioned, it's tightly regulated. Before any animal arrives in the U.S., import, export licenses are required before any commercial import or export of wildlife occurs. These licenses are held by the importers, in this case, Dan Mulleary, and are the first step of the process for legal importation. Then to enter the country, the accompanying declaration form, which is 3-177, for the shipment, which identifies the species and quantity as required. The importation and exportation documents from Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, which is CITES, and the USFWS,
U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
Yep, in general, do not include subspecies, which...
So there we go in muddying the waters of what like if you want paperwork, like everyone says on these locality animals, the paperwork that you're going to get is going to say MR jam or MR reticulatus.
Yeah, it's as a matter of fact, it says on here, it literally on here on the actual one that came from
it says Python
shipment.
reticulatus live. This doesn't mean much to me, but
there was 8 of them.
It's a little muddy. It's hard to read.
There were 8 of them, and it was $200.
Oh, you're on the next page. I'm looking at the CITES paperwork where it says Python reticulatus live, and then the next few words are a little muddy, but I can't. So I'm not going to attempt to read them. But then it says reticulated python. I'd imagine that's reticulated python in the native language.
Yeah, I mean it says. I'll give it a shot. It says Ular Sanka Batik.
And what was I'm imagining this was the paperwork from 2013. Yes, it was. But there were 25 heads of reticulated pythons in that. So outside of the 10 Kalaotoas, there were 15 other reticulated pythons that were imported there.
That definitely has to be their like name of where they're being imported from, because right above there's Ular Sanka carpet, which is a carpet python.
In that import, there were peach-throated monitors, Dumerals monitors, blue-tail monitors, blood pythons, and that looks like it.
Yeah. So on the bottom of page 127, kind of like what we were talking about. And by the way, that one paper that we're reading through, that was the CITES exportation permit for a March 2015 shipment, again, which is likely the very last shipment of Retics in the U.S. that were imported legally. So that's like a nice little piece of history.
Yeah, very nice piece of history. And you mentioned the $200 price point. I don't know if that was for the entire shipment or if that's per piece.
Yeah, because right here, if you look at on the left page on 126, you look at Morelia viridis green tree python. It says that there's 30 of them, but the total price is $3,000. So I can make the connection that it's not $3,000 for an imported chondro, and there's 30 of them in there, which would be what, $120,000?
Yeah.
No. It's not. That's not
but
happening.
Even $300 a piece seems a little high to me, but the $200 mark for the reticulated python, it's like, oh, so that's mainland prices.
Right. I mean, but that's for 8, right? So you do 200 divided by 8. So they're selling for, I don't know, what's, if it's four to, I'm not a mathematician, but not a lot of money.
I'm not going to attempt to do math
Like
in my head right now.
25 each or something.
Yeah.
So actually 25. Yeah, that was easy math. That was really dumb. $25 each. Okay. So on the bottom of page 127, so likewise, reticulated pythons, regardless of subspecies, are not protected at the subspecies level. Because of that, there's almost no official documentation showing that an animal is of the subspecies MR jampianus, or the locality information of where a particular animal was collected from. The only paperwork that will list the locality information is a receipt from an importer or exporter, which they gather from any locality information written on the carrying container for the animal, or from their communication with the trappers. So again, I just want to like go back to like this whole locality debate on like, there's the people that really just like, how do I say this kindly? Make me scratch my head when they try to make the argument of if you didn't catch it, you don't know where the snake is from. This is a good example of like, where I say the reputation of the importer is everything. And in herpetoculture, no one is using locality information with GPS coordinates.
It doesn't exist. None of these coconut farmers are carrying out a GPS tool with them while they're collecting snakes.
I wonder what they're using even to collect snakes. Like just hand and throwing them in bags, or you think
that's what I would imagine.
Yeah, there's no way they have hooks. They might have branches.
I mean, I would imagine just with how used to that kind of side hustle, they're not worried about it too much. They're grabbing those snakes because, that's.
Oh man, Nathan just cut out. It's been a while since that happened.
Man,
welcome back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It has been a while since that happened, but
yeah. Oh, you heard me say that?
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, it wasn't a bad one this time, but that's
good.
That's their, food for their family, or that's, what's keeping everything going for them. So, I would imagine that most of them don't have many qualms about, taking a bite or two while getting these snakes.
No. I mean, for them, it's, they're, again, even if they're selling them for what, $2 a snake, or that's what they're getting, like that's sure huge. Phenomenal.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what happens once Dan has gotten these animals in his possession. So, once they're at his point, right? Like he has them, Dan begins the quarantine process for new imports. So regardless of the taxa, whenever animals freshly caught from the wild are brought into the private collection for captive purposes, there are a strict set of guidelines that should be followed to protect the health of the wild collected animal, any other animal in the keeper's care, and the keeper themselves. So while a general quarantine guideline is presented in the health concerns chapter, there are special considerations for wild collected animals. And so I think it'd be important to kind of talk about that. Again, if you guys get the book, you'll get to see a lovely picture of Glenn taking a fecal swab for endoparasites with the male Kalaotoa that I have in my garage right now. So,
well, and it's not just that; it's feces and urates that they're testing.
Right, exactly. In addition to other stuff. So,
yeah.
What Dan does is he makes an appointment with a veterinarian, and only a veterinarian can give a keeper an accurate depiction of an animal's health. So, Glenn being a vet student, like he's very, very, very cognizant of like seek out a vet. Don't try to diagnose. Don't do things yourself. Like if you,
there's a lot of bad actors that try to play vet.
Yeah.
With reptiles.
Yeah. And you know what? I will say this, like what you do with your private collection is up to you.
Absolutely.
I don't think that if you are going to be literally performing any procedures on your animals, without a license to do so, you should not be showing it.
Yeah,
to the public.
Something you shouldn't encourage other people to do. for the safety of everyone's collection, like I don't want to be encouraged on how to slice open my snake and remove a parasite. Like that's beyond my abilities. Like
it's also illegal.
I'm humble enough to admit that, right?
Yeah, it's also illegal. Depending on who's doing it and how known they are in their local community, they probably get away with a lot of it. But at the end of the day, the moment that you start getting invasive with any animal, you're performing a procedure that you are not qualified to do. And, that's like, yeah, it's just,
I think where it becomes really illegal and where you're going to have repercussions is when you're offering that service to other people.
Exactly. All right. So let's continue here. With reputable importers like Mulleary and those previously mentioned, wouldn't dream of it. Others will sell diseased parasitic animals on death's doors. They prey on unsuspecting buyers without the experience or knowledge base to know an animal's origin of health, which usually dies in a matter of days, weeks, or months. Because of these antics, newly imported reptiles should always be seen by a veterinarian. Now, me tapping into the chondro industry, you can tell when someone on one of the Facebook pages says, just got my first chondro, what's wrong with it? And it looks like an imported biak that is dehydrated, and that you can tell that snake started dying 2 weeks ago. And it's just, there's really no way to turn it around.
Yeah. I mean, its systems are actively shutting down. So
yeah,
good luck trying to repair that.
Yeah. So at a vet's going to look for the presence of endoparasites, ectoparasites, hydration level, body condition score, the appearance of the animal's feces and urates, inquire about the animal's frequency of eating and other husbandry related information. This information gives veterinarian the pertinent details to assess the animal's health and what it needs to address if there are any shortcomings. Often imported specimens need to be dewormed. Have you ever? No, you probably haven't.
No, I haven't. I haven't had any wild caught animals in my collection ever.
What's great is I just started getting some more, right? I've had long-term captives with the retics, but I got to import biak and some carpet pythons and
yeah, you definitely had this experience.
Well, so I haven't had to deworm because again, when you get it through a reputable importer like Dan does a deworming process. So what ends up happening is what I have to do is just monitor urates and shit. And if I see worms, then I would, I got my vet who would come over and we would weigh the animal. He'd give me the proper dose and show me how to do it. And after that, I'd do it on my own.
Well, and that's one thing. Like some of these drugs, ivermectin is the most common, available over the counter. I can go down to my local Tractor Supply and go get ivermectin right now. But do I know the proper dose? No,
yeah.
I'm not a vet.
Yeah. So for those unfamiliar, like deworming is basically the process of getting any internal or external parasites out of the snake, and they are done with anthelminthic drugs, which basically, it bypasses all the internal parasites and it kind of just shits and pisses it out. So that's you mentioned which one? Ivermectin? No.
Ivermectin is the infamous one.
Yeah. There's but actually I'm not even going to read these. If you guys want to read them, they're all long names.
Metronidazole, and I'm probably butchering all of these, but hey, whatever. Fenbendazole, praziquantel, sulfonamides, piperazine, paromycin.
Paromycin.
I was almost there.
Mm-hmm.
Paromycin or mom. I'm gonna just
Mom?
stop.
Are you there? Mom? Are you watching? Mom?
She probably is.
So In addition to internal parasites, again, we talked about external parasites. They need to be looked at. Ticks and mites are the most commonly encountered ectoparasites. The presence of ectoparasites is especially noteworthy because of their ease in transferring to humans. So while certain endoparasites can likewise be transmitted to humans, the risk is greatly reduced with proper biosecurity measures. In the United States, Lyme disease, babesiosis, ehrlichiosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, anaplasmosis, southern tick-associated rash illness, tick-borne relapsing fever, and tularemia can all be harbored by ticks. That's fun.
Yeah.
Makes me not want
Rocky
to go
Mountain
hiking.
spotted fever just sounds awful because I'm in the Rocky Mountains. It feels close to home, right?
Right.
And symptoms are going to be a sudden moderate to high fever that can last up to 3 weeks, severe headache, rash that usually appears 2 to 4 days after the fever starts. Let's see, swelling around the eyes or on the back of the hands, muscle pain, fatigue, chills, nausea, vomiting, stomach pain, lack of appetite. So just general lethargicness.
And those are just the ones that are in the US that we read. Like, we're not even talking about like what ticks and mites can carry from other countries that we don't know what they go through over there. I'm pretty sure that's how COVID happened.
Little different. Gain of function research is a little bit different than getting a tick on you.
So let's talk about the quarantine process. So once it's cleared by the vet, the quarantine process begins. And again, a lot of this is detailed in the health concerns, and we'll get to that chapter. But wild collected specimens should spend an extended period of time in quarantine compared to captive bred and born specimens. And the recommendation for captive bred and born specimens is 90 days. So typically what's recommended for wild caught animals is 6 months. Now, I will say, there is absolutely a best practice for everything, right? And I think 6 months for an import absolutely is your best practice. I know a lot of people that don't do that.
But that's not just 6 months of sitting in quarantine. That's 6 months, and then after that, another vet visit to just double check the animal.
Right. Just to be clear.
It details if you're not willing to do that, then you need to wait a full year of quarantine with that animal.
Yeah. So, if you're doing it by the book and you're doing it right, this is a process. It's a process. Because let me tell you what.
Tell me.
Importers are not doing that whole year quarantine. They're not keeping these imports for a year and then selling them. They are making...
That doesn't make them money.
No, I mean, a good importer is going to start the deworming process, is going to treat for mites, and after 3 months, it's on the way. And I mean, even for some importers, when people I'll use Dan again for an example. He's got a facility over in Malaysia or Indonesia. Sorry, Dan, one of the two. Oftentimes he starts the quarantine process over in that facility, right? And so sometimes he'll get animals collected like in January, but the shipment doesn't come out until June when it reaches the US. And so it's spending those 4 or 5 months being treated and cared for. So
is that facility at his house that he built up with Apple?
No, I believe he has a
separate facility outside.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So what does a quarantine enclosure look like for you? Because Glenn posted a picture of his quarantine enclosure there.
I'll say Glenn's is what everyone would hope that their quarantine enclosure would look like. It's very sterile in terms of like what I use for bedding. So you're on a paper bedding. That way you can be looking for anything crawling around the cage. It's a lot easier to identify anything external that might be happening with that animal, especially mites, that kind of thing. But his is lined with universal rock, got naturalistic hides, like as far as a quarantine enclosure, it's a little over the top.
Yeah, and I mean, because I'm thinking like with the rock backgrounds, like the scrubbing that needs to happen, right? And to make sure that we're disinfecting any of like what we're trying to quarantine for can be difficult.
Could potentially get behind that background?
But what I will say is that the paper substrate is a must in quarantine, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like you said, you got to be able to see, it's going to be hard to be able to, see if you have a loose soil substrate bedding.
Yeah. You'd be hard pressed to find stuff crawling around in that. Whereas like keeping on paper, you know the cage is clean at all times. You have to go in for maintenance. You know, there's just a little bit more hands-on with that animal, making sure it's okay.
Yeah. All right. Let's get back to the Reach Streamline story here.
Yeah.
So on page 132, so after being deemed healthy and sufficiently established in captivity, 8 of the 10 snakes imported.
You actually are skipping past something that I want to highlight.
Oh, go for
it. So in addition to the reasoning behind quarantine, this time period is also used to establish the animal or the wild animal in the captive setting. The transition can be exceedingly difficult, especially for adult animals. The adult animals are often trying to escape from their enclosures to the point of injuring themselves. They'll refuse to eat, consistently regurgitate meals, and generally fail to thrive in captive settings.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many people are on the Retic Nation, but I mean, you see this with captive animals sometimes. Captive born and bred, where they're just so active or wanting to get out of their enclosure to the point where they will push to the point of like severely injuring themselves.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. And I can even say, with my import carpet python, right? It had it did not want to get out of its water bowl, and that animal ended up passing away in my possession. And my vet came over, did a necropsy, and
was that an adult animal?
No, subadult.
Okay. So it had lived part of its life in the wild. It's being thrown into a totally new, totally different situation, and probably just freaked out, didn't know what to do.
Yeah, just didn't do well. Shitty loss, but I mean, it happens. Again, when you deal with imports, it's not all roses and butterflies.
No, not at all.
So these 8 of these 10 snakes imported from the 2015 shipment were sold to various private collectors. The remaining 2 snakes, the Reachstream male and the female, were kept by Mulleary, which he deemed the most attractive of the imports. And for 6 years, Mulleary attempted to breed the pair to no success. While they were in Mulleary's possession, the pair became a highly sought-after commodity with their cryptic patterns and varying shades of grays and blacks, making for the quintessential Kalaotoa look. So once he kind of had, half a dozen years of not being able to breed them, he sold the pair. The Reachstream male and female were sold to Forrest Fanning of Zoo Dreams at the Pomona Reptile Super Show on August 10th and 11th in 2019. So again, Dan just showing that he has records for everything, which is phenomenal. That's why, like, when Dan, if you reach out to Dan, Dan will let you know if he had an import of what localities, of what he did. So if you ever have someone that hits you up, or you're hitting up to buy a locality animal from, and they say that the parents came back from Dan Mulleary, or, great grandparents came back from Dan Mulleary, like, Dan Mulleary will talk to you. Reach out to him. Confirm the information if you can. So as Fanning was unfamiliar with breeding reticulated python, the snakes were given to Garrett Hartle, Reach Out Reptiles, for a partnership breeding, and sadly, Forrest Fanning passed away on March 1st, 2020. It would not see the fruits of the partnership come to fruition during his lifetime. This was a really awesome part that Garrett has been doing with this line to honor the memory of Fanning.
Garrett was originally the one trying to buy these animals, right? But for whatever reason, Forrest was the preferred buyer.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Garrett talks about that when he talks about the Reachstream lines in his video on YouTube.
Yeah. It's a fun story. He wanted these animals, and a lot of people really wanted these Kalaotoas for a long time.
Yeah. Now, what Garrett did to honor the memory of fanning, the wild collected male and female were called the Reach Dreams animal, and an amalgamation of the two companies named and served as a reminder of the legacy fanning left behind. And unfortunately, in mid-December 2022, tragedy struck again with the Reach Dream females dying after ovulating and following a pairing with the Reach Dream males, effectively ending the dream of the Reach Dream bloodline. However, the Reach Dream male has had a series of continued reproductive successes, carrying on his genetics to further generations. The first successful progeny from the Reach Dream male hatched on May 8th, 2021, after successfully breeding with an F1 Kalaotoa type female who was hatched from a wild collected female's parthenogenic clutch.
So those females are just barely potentially breeding if someone wants to do an early pairing.
Right. And hopefully they're crossing them into like locality, like Kalaotoas. Sorry. Anyways.
I had a feeling.
It just, yeah. So in total, the Reach Dream male passed through at least 6 different people's possessions since his life on the island. It is incredibly difficult for those looking to track a specific locality type's animal's origin. There is a myriad of opportunities for essential information to be twisted, misconstrued, or forgotten. Still, as demonstrated, it is possible. So, there's a picture on the top of 134 of a beautiful cross, or not cross, but it's a Reach Dream's male progeny.
So from that 2021 breeding.
Yeah, look at that look at the color on that.
Really, really gold.
I wonder if that was taken to a TK animal, because it's got a lot of TK like that, the diamonds on the back and just kind of the cleanness of the pattern. That's a beautiful snake.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess I'm curious with you. Do you think I have a question for you before we start to wrap up like the chapters and I only have a couple more underlined things that I want to note and highlight. More. Oh, okay, go for
it. So next page 135. The story of importation of M. reticulatus into the United States concluded 2 years after the Reach Dreams male arrived on March 6, 2015. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service listed reticulated pythons as injurious under the Lacey Act, along with anacondas. I just don't want to butcher that name.
Deshaunees.
Yeah. Or Dushancies, anacondas, green anacondas, and Benny anacondas. The ruling went into effect 30 days after its publication on March 10th, 2015. Previously, on March 12th, 2010, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service proposed adding reticulated pythons along with 8 other species of large constrictor snakes to the Lacey Act as injurious non-native species. These constrictors included the Benny anaconda, boa constrictors, Burmese pythons, the Dushancies anacondas, green anacondas, Indian pythons, northern and southern African rocks, and yellow anacondas. April 8th, 2015 was the last legal day to import reticulated pythons, as importation ban went into effect the following day. Any reticulated python imported to the U.S. after April 9th, 2015, excluding zoological, educational, medical, or scientific purposes with proper permits, was done so illegally, as no more reticulated pythons can be imported to the U.S. or imported for U.S. herpetoculture. There's a limit, so there is that limited gene pool of working with pure locality types. I believe the only things that we've, clearly seen enter the country have been mainland morphs.
Yep. Yeah. And that's because I think a lot of the people that are importing things illegally are more invested in the morph game.
Yeah.
But I'm curious before we jump into the next page, if importation opened up, Nathan. If importation opened up,
mm-hmm.
Do you think that we would do it better?
No.
You don't?
I think importers may have a more of a reason to make sure, the locality type snakes are being labeled correctly. There's a higher selling point for the animals that you can trace back to a specific island, specific area. So, I do think there is a chance on the importer level.
Right.
If someone were to go out and just try to get these CITES permits on their own and do it without the importer, then no. I think there would be a handful of people that would jump all over the opportunity to try to get licensed and be able to do that. So if we have Dan working on it, then sure.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think what I would probably, if it were, I think the only way that it's going to work to even open up importation, right, realistically, is if U.S. Fish and Wildlife only gave X amount of import permits for these species, right? With X number of animals you could import a year, so like a quota. I don't think it would ever become like a free for all open for reticulated python imports, and maybe they would give out 5 export permits a year and 10 snakes per like that's one way in my head that I think that it would make sense to be able to do. Now, I will say this, I've talked about already just kind of like downsizing the retic stuff, and not like drastically or anything, but just kind of focusing on locality stuff and moving some of the more stuff out. That is one thing that would get me full force back into the retic game. I would talk to Dan and other importers. I would try to learn the process and try to go through that process myself.
Yeah. I believe, like with you, just being so invested into localities, that you would do it properly, right? But, there's people that are just going to jump on it as a money grab. There's the other argument of, importation could possibly happen if these guys get a full-blown species reassignment, right?
Right. Yeah.
So totally outside of mainland reticulated pythons. One thing I want to note, because it is a small group of people that have established this.
I had that underlined too.
Yep. Many of the remaining breeding lines of reticulated pythons in the U.S. can be traced back to only 4 importers. That blows my mind.
Yeah.
And, there wasn't the demand for them back then, but still to think that there were only 4 importers that are responsible for, the bulk of what we have in the U.S. is pretty wild. So that's Cameron Tepidellin.
Yeah, that's Bushmaster.
Okay. Eric Keister, many of you have heard of, Michael Cole, and of course, Dan Mulleary. Other importers such as Dan Uramovic helped establish non-locality type specific super dwarf lines that are still extant.
Yeah. So again, just what I was talking about, the reputation of the importer is essential to establish the legitimacy of an animal's locality type status. These importers are experts in the highly complex locality specific importation process. As such, there is little to no doubt about the legitimacy of the locality origin of any reticulated pythons they imported. So specifically about these people. Through their relationship with reptile farmers, trappers, and government officials, they can ensure that the animals they acquire indeed come from where they were claimed to be captured. Oftentimes, reputable importers will offer more money to trappers and collectors to ensure they collect animals from the desired location. And, because trappers and collectors tend to be of low socioeconomic status, the extra money would have provided the necessary incentive to keep them honest and collect the animals from the correct area. I was talking to Dan about the story of Bali yellowhead reticulated pythons. So everyone kind of IDs like Bali locality types with these yellow heads, right?
Even though we've talked about in this book already that yellow heads is a very common trait of just reticulated pythons.
But what's crazy is that the craze over here in the US and over in the UK about Bali yellowheads, right? And I remember there's a magazine that was published with a retic on the front, and it was a Bali, and it had this bright yellow head, and it talked about the Bali yellowhead. So what ended up happening was that everyone wanted these Bali yellowheads, and exporters and trappers were collecting animals from Bali that didn't have yellow heads, which again, like not every retic from Bali has a yellow head. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, because the importers were such on like this craze of yellow-headed Balis, that so many trappers and exporters got fired and their income seized because they were selling what, importers would call them liars. And they lost their reputation and their ability to be collectors, and essentially lost that source of income because they were still collecting animals from Bali, but they just didn't have a yellow head. It's insane.
And to think there's no variety within that large of a range in Bali.
Right. So, again, the reputation of the importer is everything here. And I highlighted this whole paragraph, so bear with me because I said this earlier. And I got to just say it louder for the people in the back.
A common refrain starting there.
Yeah.
Yep. Same here.
A common refrain in herpeticulture is that there is no sure way to know if a locality type animal came from the said area. That refrain is supported by the fact that there is no publicly known GPS data to corroborate the origin of where any reticulated python was captured from in the U.S. Herpeticulture setting. That's like if you didn't catch it yourself, then you don't know for sure, right? So even though GPS data is not available for captive purposes, purchasing a pure locality type animal from a reputable breeder who can provide the lineage and legitimate importation information is sufficient to claim the snake is of that locality type. A guide to establishing the provenance of pure locality type reticulated pythons will be discussed in the What is a Pure Locality Reticulated Python? Ooh, I'm going to be excited to read that and how it pertains to your chapter, bud. Well, not just that. We did an episode. What is a pure locality retic?
Yeah.
So I'll be interested to see what's on there versus our video. So though the lack of GPS data does not affect herpeticulture, no credible XC2 study can be conducted from captive populations that examine the locality origins of an animal. So for example, if a study were to be conducted that looked at 345 BP fragment of the cytochrome B gene of a captive reticulated python. Screw you, Glenn. Like he had to throw that in there. In the US to find gene specific locality information, it would not be sufficient merit if there is no bona fide proof that the animal came from the island. So in other words,
you could show relation animal to animal, but you couldn't say because they share relation, they're both from Kalaotoa 100%.
Yeah, and so that's why like a lot of these people are trying to do shed testing, right? Mm-hmm. And like that kind of stuff and like identifying localities. And it's like, first and foremost, Madu Karumpa, Karumpa Lompa, Kalaotoa, I guarantee you on a DNA test, it's the same damn animal. But what I will say is that for scientific purposes, for herpetology, for biology, all of those major fields, GPS coordinates is required. But the long-standing herpeticulture standard of locality type animals for every species out there is reliant on the importer's reputation.
Okay, here's my plan. If said importation ever opens up again, we offer more money and we supply the trappers with iPhones.
Yes.
They have to take a picture of each animal that they capture. That way it's geotagged already.
They can put it on iNatural.
Exactly. I mean, even just the picture itself will have GPS coordinates. So,
right.
I mean, granted, they have cellular connection. So we need to build infrastructure on Kalaotoa, Madu.
Right. We'll wipe out Karumpa, 3/4 of the population.
All these coconut farms are gone, but we'll get that picture with GPS.
We'll get a tower. We'll build an island in the middle of the 4 islands, and it'll just be a tower.
Or we could just, place those tree towers within their coconut farms.
Yeah. Guys, one thing that I don't think that we talked about, by the way, that's the chapter.
Yeah, I do want to just go through the last paragraph, as Glenn likes to kind of summarize what we went through. As demonstrated, the importation process of reticulated pythons is a complex affair. Tracing the passage of a single snake as it made its way from Palau Kalaotoa to the United States showcases the varying intricacies involved in the passage. However, the complexities are integral to the larger story of reticulated pythons, the mystery surrounding them, and how they made their way to our homes. While it only lasted for 2 decades, the importation of reticulated pythons into the United States dramatically altered the way of life for the animals on the islands and the captive reptile trade.
Yeah, it was a great chapter. I think one of my favorite chapters so far because it's a beautiful story.
That, and it just gives me Stolen World vibes, and yeah,
right. Makes me want to open up the book again.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely going to some point this year, or I guess next year. That's
yeah.
You know, I have this book to get through this year.
Right, exactly. Okay, so we didn't share this at the beginning of the episode, so we'll probably share it at the beginning of next episode. But the Reptile Lounge Network is going to be taking our first month break in December. So, that's the Conjure Lounge and the Retic Lounge. The Retic Lounge has been going 2.5 years strong of weekly episodes, and we are going to take the month off in December to it's not really take the month off. We're still going to be lining up interviews and trying to schedule interviews out in advance. And
we'll still be hanging out with our Patreon family every couple weeks.
Yeah, but we are not going to be releasing any content or episodes for the month of December. And so here for the month of November, we have 3 more episodes left, and then we'll see you guys at the new year. But yeah, just wanted to share that information. We'll share it at the beginning of next episode as well, just so that people listen in. But Nate, you got anything else before we sign out?
No, just like you said, that was a fun one to go through. It's just, especially the story of a certain animal making its way all the way from Kalaotoa, making all those trade ship swaps, the importation outside of the reptile farm out to LAX. I think it's just a really cool story and demonstrates a lot of what these animals had to go through to be here. So yeah, I just thoroughly enjoyed that read. You're muted.
Oh, damn it. Right at the freaking end. All right, everyone. We'll see you on episode 119 of the Retic Lounge next Friday. You guys have a good one.